Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
Well, these are the sounds of Hurricane Delta making landfall around 5:30 this morning Central Time along the northeastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Roared on shore with Category 2 wind speeds of near 110 miles per hour in gusts. And you can see the strong winds whipping through the trees here in Playa del Carmen. The storm also produced a lot of lightning. And one of the reasons why we saw a lot of lightning is because some of those thunderstorms were extremely tall and cold and had some ice inside of them. And that is associated with a hurricane that is going to be very formidable over the next couple of days, moving northward through the Gulf of Mexico. This is a forecast from the Hurricane Center showing you that perhaps on Friday morning, we may be dealing with a 120-mile-per-hour hurricane carrying all the hazards that storms like this do with significant storm surge threat, and that will likely move inland in parts of Louisiana on Friday evening, and then still farther inland, accelerating northward through there, carrying with it the damaging wind threat hundreds of miles inland, especially right near and to the east of where the center of circulation tracks. So we're going to have to watch Delta, not just up to landfall, but also long after it, to track the potential for damage that the wind will carry with it. Let's move Delta northwestward through the Gulf of Mexico, according to the U.S. GFS model, showing you that by tomorrow evening, it may indeed be out here. And we will start to see at least the beginnings of some of the effects with some showers and perhaps some gusty winds at times along the northern Gulf Coast, including Texas and Louisiana and areas to the east from there. We will likely see landfall on Friday and probably along the Louisiana coast. Exactly where yet, we don't know. We'll refine the track going forward. But this is the most likely outcome. It doesn't rule out the others, but this is the most likely scenario where you have a landfall of a significant hurricane, hopefully weakening on final approach. Again, there's some signs that maybe it will do that, but it will still come ashore as a powerful hurricane with damaging, destructive winds in places and also significant storm surge potential all the way across Louisiana and areas to the east in Mississippi and Alabama and even over to the Florida Panhandle. And then we will likely watch during the overnight on Friday into early Saturday morning the northeastward progression of Delta as it moves in that direction and carrying with it the damaging wind threat and rainfall through at least the first part of the weekend. Overall, if you look at the rainfall, it looks like we're going to get quite a bit, Alex, and some of these numbers will be locally higher depending on the track and movement of Delta, but we're going to see likely some flooding from freshwater flooding from rainfall to the tune of 5 to 8 inches across parts of Louisiana. Back to you.
Thanks, Dr. Postel. Well, we turn to the northeast where we could see some feisty storms fire up from the interior parts of the region all the way to the 95 corridor. And that includes places like Syracuse as well as Boston. Syracuse there's been a bit on the wet side for a good chunk of the morning. Start to see some blue sky there. All blue sky in Boston, but you will be dealing with the gray skies pushing through as well as some storms, and some of those could be severe. Here's what it looks like on the radar, and there's some of this wet weather. This was the wet weather that was impacting Syracuse an hour ago, but that has now shifted east. We're not done, though. You see what's coming in over the lake. Lake Ontario, we've got some storms, and those are going to be moving eastbound. Some of those storms could be strong to even severe. We'll certainly have to keep an eye on that. A lot of lightning strikes showing up at this point here just to the north of Watertown and heading on north and east, and those will continue to head eastbound. Then we head off towards the 87 corridor, Saratoga Springs. You're seeing some of the rain right now, mostly north of Albany, but there is some wet weather to your west that's going to fill in, so get ready for some downpours to show up there. Now, again, it's a steady rain initially, and then we've got the risk for some stronger storms. Anywhere you see this red showing up, the possibility for severe weather does exist. Damaging wind gusts in excess of 60 miles per hour. That's going to be a threat accompanying some of those thunderstorms. But even outside of the thunderstorm threat, there is the opportunity for some pretty strong winds. Wind advisories, we've got a number of those here from New York State into New England. Syracuse, Buffalo, down to New York City, the Portland area, and then down into Massachusetts, most of the state, high wind warnings here. And the thing that we're going to have to watch out for is the fact that these leaves, they're still on the trees. So with these winds coming on through, that's going to potentially bring trees down, landing on power lines. Those power outages may ensue. So that is a risk here for the day. Watch out for that across sections of the Northeast. But let's follow the rain. That'll continue to spread its way across New England. Then we get the threat for some of those stronger storms driving on by. Now, isolated in nature. It's not going to be everyone seeing severe weather, but the risk certainly is there. Things should quiet down in terms of the storms later this evening, but still gusty with those winds. We'll certainly have to watch out for that. Spot like Bangor here, we've got mainly just some clouds around through the I'll call it late afternoon, but we're watching ourselves deal with the storms as we get to about 4 or 5 o'clock. Gusty winds continuing, 25 to even 30-mile-per-hour winds showing up there in parts of Maine. Well, coming up, the Gulf Coast set for a dangerous encounter with Hurricane Delta. And after the break, some in-depth analysis from our hurricane expert, Dr. Greg Postel, on where this storm is headed, as well as the impacts that Delta will bring.
Watching America's most trusted TV news network,
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
the Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather on Quibi. From the viral
Now to the weather video that we cannot stop watching.
to the vital
Get ready because we are in for another wet week.
and all the wonderful weather in between.
Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Twenty-nine past the hour. Welcome back. I'm meteorologist Alex Wallace. As we continue tracking Hurricane Delta, well, the time to prepare is now. Just a couple of days away from that landfall in the U.S. as Hurricane Delta spins into the Gulf of Mexico. And this would be our 10th U.S. landfall of the season. It has really been an insane one. Well, here's what we know about Delta right now. Delta made its first landfall this morning along the northeastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula there near Puerto Morelos. Hurricane watches, they are now up from Houston to New Orleans, and all schools in Calcasieu Parish, they are closed. So let's get to the latest here when it comes to Delta. Advisory from the National Hurricane Center. This was the 10 o'clock advisory. We'll be getting another one not too long from now. 105-mile-per-hour Category 2 hurricane with its movement to the northwest at 17 miles per hour. So it continues to move at a pretty good clip as opposed to stalling out, sitting here, dumping the rain, lashing with the gusty winds. Of course, the water rise as well. It is bringing that, but the duration of time of having to deal with that lessened because it is moving on a quicker pace. But we do still have our hurricane warnings. Those are the areas in the purple here, northeastern Yucatan, and on either side of that, we have tropical storm warnings in place in those locations. No longer the case, though, across western Cuba. The tropical storm warnings, they were allowed to drop with that last advisory. But you can see here, there's still been some intense thunderstorm activity with this circulation. Certainly, we saw some weakening as it's been over land, as anticipated. But now as it starts to emerge over water, we're starting to see it flare up some thunderstorm activity here, some lightning strikes showing up. And so we do think as it moves over those waters that we will see it begin to re-strengthen. 6 to 9 foot storm surge possible here anywhere in this zone. Not everyone will realize that 6 to 9 feet, but somewhere in that area, the possibility exists. We'll notice the stronger winds associated with Delta continuing to push away. This is by basically overnight into Thursday morning. Some of the stronger winds associated with it, again, moving over the Gulf waters. But watch later down the road, hurricane watches and tropical storm watches, they are now up. And we're going to be watching for storm surge as well. Those watches are up basically from Texas, parts of Texas, into southern portions of Alabama. So large zone having to deal with the system as it gets closer and closer. Let's bring in Dr. Postel to focus in on this thing. And Dr. Postel, many are hoping that as it approaches, it will begin to be winding down compared to what we've seen over the last this season as these things have ramped up. This may be the other side of the story. We can only hope for that.
We can hope for that. And there's some signs that it might do that, but it is still, as you know, Alex, you've been saying all along, this is still going to be, regardless of that potential, a powerful hurricane. moving inland likely on Friday, whether it's midday or later on in the afternoon. We just don't know for sure, but expect a powerful hurricane making landfall probably in Louisiana and bringing its impacts not just at distance from the center of circulation out to one side, but also inland as well, because circulation out to one side, but also inland as well, because it will be moving fairly quickly and carry some damaging winds, especially along and to the right side of where the center of circulation goes. That's why, along with the other data, understanding that impacts are spread distantly from the center as well. This is where the official center position is forecasted from the Hurricane Center. It is likely to begin accelerating in response to this upper trough that is now moving in by, say, tomorrow evening to the Gulf of Mexico. And that really leaves not much wiggle room in the forecast in this part of the Gulf of Mexico. We're pretty tightly clustered around the idea that it will indeed make landfall in Louisiana and begin to accelerate with the trough coming in. Each one of those lines, again, is a different forecast model from the hurricane models, and then the official forecast in the Hurricane Center is here, which I think is important to show as well. We will see Delta moving across the Gulf of Mexico and moving at this point during the day tomorrow over some very warm water still that is deep, Alex, and we will likely see strengthening of Delta. But then, as you were mentioning, hopefully the wind shear comes into play, perhaps some of the cooler shelf waters come into play and allow this to weaken at least a little bit, maybe, as it makes final approach. And I'll talk about this graphic coming up later, but that's the idea that maybe this is something we can hope for, that a little bit of weakening on final approach, but still a powerful hurricane coming in.
Absolutely. Well, Louisiana set for a dangerous encounter with Hurricane Delta. And, of course, that's where we find meteorologist Mike Seidel in Morgan City, Louisiana. We'll be checking with him in just a bit. And, of course, we'll have all the very latest here, not just from Mike, but got team coverage here in Louisiana for now, for the rest of the day and into tonight.
Watching America's most trusted TV news network,
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
the Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to Morgan City, Louisiana. We're on the Atchafalaya River. What they're doing is they're dredging. They have a lot of issues with sand coming up here, and they got to keep the channel nice and deep, and they're going to have more issues as Hurricane Delta makes its approach and landfalls along the Louisiana coast sometime on Friday. And we've got Deputy Sheriff David Spencer from St. Mary Parish joining us right now. And Deputy Sheriff, thanks for coming out.
No problem.
Give us the latest on the evacuations that were signed with an order this morning.
They were signed this morning. They're voluntary evacuations from the areas south of the Intercoastal Waterway, which will hit our, further south points like Sycamore Point, Burns Point, and those are the areas that always take on water when we have a storm like this.
At low populated areas?
Yeah, pretty much. There are some people down there though, and we like to try to get them out of there if we can.
Did you evacuate those areas with a mandatory evacuation back with Laura?
I believe it was a voluntary. I think most people leave from down there.
Well, this one's expected to track closer.
Right.
A lot of concern here.
Very much so. We're watching this one closely. Even like they're saying right now, we're going to get that water surge no matter what it does at this point. Mm-hmm. So we're concerned. We're watching it very closely.
Yeah, it's just a matter of how much surge. Right now, down on the Gulf, just south of here, we're expecting the worst case to be 7 to 11 feet. We've got the seawall here. They were closing some of the gates earlier. That protects the city from the river up to 22 feet.
Right. Yeah, very effective. River's not going over that wall, so they take care of us, these walls do.
And what about the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center? What's the status of that?
Yeah, we are going ahead. We're going to be moving in some communications and setting that up tomorrow. It'll be ready to roll. We'll set up incident command there with the Sheriff's Office. The United States Coast Guard will also be in there, and they work real well with us in times like this.
Let me put you on the spot. You know anything about how they've staged power crews? Because I did read online that a lot of the power crews are out of pocket because they're still dealing with what happened with Laura over in the southwest part of the state.
Right, and I think normally, they would have some folks standing by fairly close. I don't know how that's going to affect with them having so many people over in the Lake Charles area. I don't know.
Well, Deputy Sheriff David Spencer, we hope that the forecast pans out. We get the shear, and as it comes in, it weakens.
That would be great. We're praying for that for sure.
Yeah, because we get power outages, and Laura, sometimes up to 3 weeks, and even
Right.
water was out. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
That's Deputy Sheriff David Spencer. We're in St. Mary Parish. This is Morgan City, Louisiana, Alex. And again, this area where I'm standing will likely be underwater come later Friday with a surge. We're not sure, the worst case scenario, 7 to 11 feet down at the Gulf, how much gets up here. But with Laura, they had 3 feet. So the water probably came right up to about where I'm standing here at the dock.
All right, Mike, well, no doubt I'll be watching that area very, very closely, no question about it, and be checking back with you in a bit. Meanwhile, yeah, look at this. This was from earlier from Cancun. You can see some of the gusty winds and some of those palm trees swaying around there for us as well. Again, this is, of course, with Hurricane Delta that made that landfall in the Yucatan here. It was around 5:30 or so Central Time this morning. We had wind gusting at the time up to close to 110 miles per hour. There's one reported over 100 there near Cancun. Strong winds, just a bit of a preview of what we could see along parts of the Gulf Coast as we get in towards our Friday. All right, let's talk about those impacts as we eventually see the system move into the waters of the Gulf of Mexico and then track its way, eventually turning more towards the north and then north and east. This is its position by Friday morning, still a 120 mile per hour hurricane as it's approaching now. Hopefully we see this thing weakening as it moves its way onshore, but still a formidable system, one that we want to take seriously and absolutely prepare for. Storm surge watches, they are up. Parts of Texas, all of Louisiana into Mississippi as well as Alabama. Some of the values that we may have to deal with here on the higher extent off to the east of where this thing makes that landfall as we see the more onshore push of water, maybe 7 to 11 feet. Not out of the question. Now, it's not everywhere in that area that'll see 7 to 11 foot of storm surge, but somewhere in that area, if everything lines up perfectly, that could certainly happen. Then, of course, we've got the rain potential here, flash flooding. We could see that from parts of Texas in towards the Florida Panhandle, which extends northbound along with this thing moving northbound as we get through Friday into Saturday, the possibility for flash flooding. And we also could see some isolated tornadoes. We oftentimes deal with that with these landfalling tropical systems, dealing with that risk. So from southeastern Louisiana, southwestern to Alabama into that zone, watch for that isolated tornado risk. A lot of moisture with the system that'll be pushing northbound. Eventually we'll see the core of the system, at least what's left of it, move north and east up through parts of the Ohio Valley. But the heaviest rain, at least right now through Saturday, looks to be right in this zone from East Texas into parts of Arkansas and western Mississippi. Pretty widespread, 3 to 5 inches, but there could be some pockets of 5 to 8 inches of rain here, maybe even some locally higher amounts. So a number of risks that we'll be certainly following here as we work our way on through the coming days. Rainfall, storm surge, all will be something that we have to deal with, along with, of course, some gusty winds. Well, still ahead, swirling vortexes of fire and smoke. Yeah, fire-nados, not to be messed with, but how do they actually form? Well, we are actually showing you in a way you can only see right here on the Weather Channel. And make sure you stay here with us on the Weather Channel all day and all week as we continue to track Hurricane Delta.
My name is Trisha. I'm 70 and I live in Mill Valley.
Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Welcome back as we follow what's happening with Delta. Hurricane Delta, which has been impacting the Yucatan Peninsula here all morning long, made the landfall here earlier this morning. Now beginning to see it emerging back over those Gulf waters. And that may mean strengthening down the road. Right now it's 105 mile per hour hurricane, category 2 hurricane with central pressure sitting at 975 millibars, moving to the northwest at 17 miles per hour. So it continues to move at a pretty decent clip as opposed to stalling out and sitting, dumping the rain and lashing the area with winds. That time frame of dealing with that lessened because it is moving quicker. But we still have hurricane warnings that are in place. Anywhere you see that purple showing up. No longer the case in western Cuba. Any alerts there for the folks there as this thing has moved off to the west. But we still have that potential for more storm surge issues. 6 to 9 feet. Can't rule that out. Somewhere in that red zone. Not everyone will see that there in that area, but the potential still exists. And then we'll watch down the road what may be happening in terms of the intensity. Again, expecting it to ramp up a little more. These are all the different computer models here, or at least some of them here, showing you the wind forecast. And they stay up in that category 4 range, a good chunk of them. But look, this is the time frame. As we start to get towards that Friday afternoon, Friday evening, there's a big dip. And that is certainly something that we can hope for as we head towards that time frame. The thinking is there'll be some cooler waters on the approach to the Gulf Coast and also some stronger winds that could impact this thing and try to temper it down just a bit. Although still a formidable system as it moves on in, we still could be talking about a category 2 hurricane making that approach as we get in towards that end of the week, Friday afternoon, evening. That's somewhere in that time frame. So there's the path, north and westbound, then turning more towards the north, and then eventually off towards the north and the east here as we head on in through the weekend. Closer view Friday morning. There you see it. Still a major hurricane. So again, even though it may be coming down a bit, it is still going to be a system that we have to watch out for gusty winds, strong winds, and of course, storm surge issues here for us right along that coast. We do have hurricane watches that are now up. Anywhere you see the orange and then the yellow areas, tropical storm watches. So tropical storm conditions or hurricane conditions are anticipated or possible in those areas over the next 48 hours. Storm surge watches. We extend across Texas, parts of Texas at least, all the way over towards Alabama, the southern portions of Alabama. Some of those values, the highest east of where it's expected to make the landfall, looks like peaking at around 7 to 11 feet possible for us. Not everywhere will see that, but somewhere in that zone, that could be realized. Well, turning now on to the fire situation in the fight there out west. Wildfires, they can make their own weather. And over the past few months, we have seen them create weather events known as fire-nados or fire whirls. Jim Cantore shows us how climate change is making these rare occurrences happen more frequently.
Being up close to a raging wildfire like this one is a terrifying experience. Unfortunately, scenes like this are going to be more common as climate change increases wildfire activity. Average annual temperatures across the western U.S. have risen nearly 2 degrees in the past few decades, allowing large wildfires to thrive on these dry, extreme conditions. You can just feel the heat. Temperatures over 1,500 degrees, flames shooting high into the air. Guess what? We can get fire whirls that develop in an instant. Pockets of extreme temperature causing the air to accelerate upward, right? Air rushing in toward the ground to fill the void. Rotation tightens and produces a column of swirling fire and smoke. These fire whirls, as they're called, are often short-lived and usually less than 50 feet across. But under certain conditions, large fires, like this one, can generate pyrocumulus thunderstorms that can produce large, long-lasting fire-nados. They can be hundreds of feet across and thousands of feet tall. Look at the size of that thing. Could you imagine the power? They combine the intensity of the raging fire with the destructive power of a tornado. Winds over 140 miles an hour leave a trail of destruction and create extremely hazardous conditions for firefighters. Unfortunately, this terrifying display might be showing up more often as warming temperatures and drying conditions become more prevalent across the western United States.
Hey, we're certainly going to have to watch with the threat for fires to the Rockies. We've got red flag warnings. That includes Great Falls to Billings, and then fire weather watches getting down into parts of Wyoming. Dry conditions, maybe some gusty winds could help to spread any fires that get going in that area pretty quickly. But as we look at the country as a whole, active large fires, those are the ones that are greater than 100 acres. Vast majority of those are here in the west, 70 in total, and they've burned more than 4 million acres. But look at the good news. This is something that we haven't seen a whole lot of here. Some wet weather heading into the weekend. Next system comes through, brings some rain to the northwest, Northern California too, and then into the interior, particularly some of the higher terrain. There could be some snow driving on into those areas. And again, we do have some fires there, so that'll help the situation in those spots. There's what it looks like in terms of the rainfall forecast. Now, the rain coming into northern Cal, it's not a ton, up to an inch. We'll take what we can get, though. Well, Delta, that is making that landfall early this morning and has made the landfall, and that means it's headed to the Gulf Coast. And next, timing on that to prepare is quickly running out. Just ahead, what you can do now to prepare.
Is real. When your cameras roll, our experts react.
Jaw-dropping.
Weather Gone Viral, Sunday nights at 9, here on the Weather Channel.
Know your evacuation zones and make those store runs right now. The clock is ticking for Hurricane Delta to make landfall on the Gulf Coast. Places affected by Laura among the cities in the cone again. Hurricane hunters are going to be out flying this afternoon into the storm to help warn you about the dangers that are going to be approaching. We have live team coverage up and down the Gulf Coast as this Category 2 hurricane gets closer by the hour. Mike.
Good afternoon, Jackie, from Morgan City, Louisiana, and they're prepping already, moving these big containers to some higher ground here. We'll show you how they really keep the Atchafalaya River out of Morgan City coming up in just a moment, ahead of Delta. Jackie?
All right, Mike. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for being with us today with our continuing coverage of Hurricane Delta. I'm meteorologist Jackie Jarris alongside storm specialist Carl Parker. He's going to be joining us in just a second. Delta is forecast to be the 10th storm to hit the U.S. this year and the 25th named storm of the season. So that would be a record for the 10th storm. 9-timed it last time around. I want to update you with what we know right now. The governors of Louisiana and Alabama have declared a state of emergency. There are mandatory evacuations of tourists underway on the Alabama coast. There have also been evacuations on 56 platforms and 1 offshore oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. And in Louisiana, some school districts are now planning to close through Friday. We want to bring in our storm specialist, Carl Parker, for the latest on Delta. And the latest advisory, Carl, did bring a little bit of a shift on that cone.
Yeah, that's right. Just a little bit farther along to the west. And so certainly we're concerned about what might happen in Lake Charles, given that they were hit so hard by Laura earlier in the season. So right now, a Category 2 storm, 105-mile-per-hour winds. It's been a very tiny system, at least in terms of the core. And so it was affected by wind shear last night, and that brought the intensity down from 145 miles per hour to Category 2 intensity, and on its way to coming out into the western part of the Gulf of Mexico. And once it gets out there, there's not going to be a lot that will hold it back. We expect that the water temperatures are going to be very warm. There's not going to be a lot of wind shear. That will change at the very last minute as the storm is making its approach. So we may see just a slight decline in intensity as the storm is coming on shore, but it's already going to be a very strong storm and forecast to be a major hurricane as it comes out here into the western Gulf. Most likely coming in on Friday, approaching as a major hurricane, 120-mile-per-hour storm, and then weakening to an 80-mile-per-hour storm as it is moving inland. But one thing about this storm relative to some previous storms that we've seen this season is that it's not going to be slowing down. It's going to be picking up speed as it's moving inland, and that's going to bring those wind impacts much farther inland relative to some storms that we've seen already. So here you see the watches that are now in effect. Hurricane watches across southern Louisiana. That includes parts of the upper Texas coast around Beaumont, also Lake Charles and Lafayette and Morgan City, and extending well inland there, right up and across I-10. Also storm surge watches in effect, and we could be looking at significant surge here. One thing to remember is that even if the storm does weaken, there is some memory because of all the wave action that is built up when the storm is more intense. And so as that comes on shore, even if the storm is weakening, we could still be looking at significant surge along the Louisiana coast. So right now, the core of the storm just coming off the Yucatan. Here's what we're talking about as regards the wind shear. We've seen a little bit of easterly shear. You can see it right in there coming into the system over the last 24 hours. But it's going to be in a very light wind environment. And then you notice that big area of strong winds over Texas. That will keep it from moving west into the middle or lower Texas coast. And that's also going to grab it up and rapidly take it north and across the southeast. So, Jackie, a very dangerous storm here. We're expecting most likely a major hurricane as it's approaching the coast going into Friday.
Yeah, Carl, I want to talk more about intensity forecasting with you in just a second, so stand by. But first, let's check this out. This is what it looked and sounded like as Delta made landfall on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. This is Cancun. Strong winds and rain hit the popular tourist destination. Delta had weakened to a high-end Category 2 hurricane by the time it made landfall in Mexico. Its eye has been very small as well, and you kind of get an idea of just how small it is from this video from hurricane hunters as they flew through Delta. More missions are set for today as Delta moves back over the open waters. It's too dangerous for they don't fly into them when they're over land, so we'll get another mission and get more data coming up this afternoon. But Carl, join us again and let's talk more about this intensity. You know, intensity models tend to be less reliable than forecast track models, and that can make it tricky from time to time. It did weaken a little bit more as it moved over land as we expected, but this time yesterday we were talking about a Category 4 storm, thinking it may stay that strong up until landfall, and that just didn't happen.
Yeah, that's right. It was a very small storm in terms of the core. The eye was only 4 miles across, and when you've got that sort of pinhole eye, storms can rapidly intensify and they can also weaken very quickly. And you notice here as the storm was approaching, we did not see a cleared out eye, even though it was for a time at Category 4 intensity. And in fact, last night, as the hurricane hunters were flying into the system, the top winds that they found right before the 11 o'clock advisory, 11 p.m., were 107 miles per hour. So they actually had cause to lower the intensity to Category 2. But of course, that's tricky because that's the last advisory of the evening, 11 o'clock. And you're thinking about the people in Cancun. If you lower it to Category 2 and then suddenly it becomes more organized in the overnight hours and becomes a Category 4, well, that is tricky in terms of messaging. So they want to be careful about that. So they did lower the intensity from 145 to 130, but they had cause to lower it even more than that. So when you've got a really small storm like that, they're a lot more susceptible to changes in environment. And that's exactly what we saw yesterday. And we're seeing right now, as a matter of fact, there is still some easterly shear that is coming into the east side of the system around an area of high pressure that is centered over the southeast, over Florida. It's going to get more away from that and more out into this area of light wind. And then there's much stronger wind over Texas and across the northern Gulf Coast. But that's not going to affect the system until the very last minute. And in fact, that can actually enhance the intensity until it starts to have a detrimental effect. It can actually start to evacuate mass near the top of the storm and make it more intense. So going forward, this thing is going to be in a light wind environment. It's going to be over very warm water. There will be some cooler water right before landfall. So we can hope that that means that we see a decline in the intensity right before it comes in. And you see that showing up in the intensity guidance here. You see how it kind of levels off there and up around major intensity, but then drops off pretty quickly. That is most likely going to be as it approaches, Jackie. But again, as mentioned, a lot of the impacts will already be built up at that time, including the wave action. And so, you know, what we saw with Katrina was that even though the storm weakened, there was still this tremendous storm surge because of what had happened over the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, so let's talk about that next. I'm looking forward to that in our next block because size really does matter and it certainly makes a difference. So we don't want people to get too excited about the thought of it weakening before landfall. Any kind of weakening is a good idea, but it doesn't mean your impacts aren't going to be bad. So keep that in mind. And here's a look at the forecast cone. It is starting to emerge back over the Gulf of Mexico now, and it will likely intensify, as Carl mentioned, back into a major hurricane. But notice there has been that little bit of a shift in a cone. New Orleans is no longer in the cone, but that doesn't mean you're not going to be having impacts here in New Orleans. You're going to be on the bad side of the storm. So you're under the tropical storm watch, and you may still have surge issues, wind issues, as well as very heavy rainfall within this area. Sad to see southwestern Louisiana maybe really taking it on the chin again this time around, but it could go a little bit off towards the east, and that would be a better case scenario for them. Notice the big change in intensity as this begins to move towards the coast and inland. We're really looking at landfall likely sometime in the afternoon, most likely on your Friday, but we'll see as this begins to accelerate a little bit more in forward speed once the trough begins begins to pick it up. So Morgan City, Louisiana, that is another place that is in the cone right now where preparations are underway. Our Mike Seidel joins us live from there right now. Mike, what's happening in Morgan City?
Well, they're beginning those early preps. We're here on Front Street, and we looked down the street, and we pulled into town yesterday. We thought it was like a Hollywood movie set, these old buildings. This is really the oldest part of Morgan City, but also notice to the left this giant seawall. Now, it used to be about 13 feet. They had tremendous flooding back in the early 70s, and they built it up, almost doubled the height of it now, 22 feet, and they finished it in 1985. So eventually, they're going to close this gate. We've got video showing you what it looked like this morning, how they get a chain on a piece of heavy equipment, and they just pull it closed. It's just simple as that. That's how it rolls, and you can see how far it goes. And what it does, it keeps the Atchafalaya River, which is out here, out of the town. We'll walk out here. Rodney Hall's behind the camera again. They're also doing some dredging out here. This is typical because they get a lot of sand and sediment and silt in the Atchafalaya Basin that comes upriver, and they got to keep this river dredged and the channel open. So you can see what they're doing out here on the river. Now you go to the left here, and that takes you out to Atchafalaya Bay in the Gulf of Mexico, where we're expecting a storm surge, worst case scenario, of 7 to 11 feet. We expect landfall sometime on Friday. The new GFS model has come in. It's a little bit later. So we really have to sort out when it's going to come in. But the bottom line is we're going to have impacts. The storm surge, the winds, and power outages. They're already here. They missed, for the most part, they missed Laura. They had a 3-foot surge. They have very few power outages because they were just so far west. So they're really concerned here right now, Jackie, about what the potential impacts will be based on the current forecast track and when the worst of it comes in, starting tomorrow night through Friday night.
All right, Mike, so we still have that time to prepare. I'd say by the time you go to bed on Thursday night, that's time to be ready for sure. Well, another place that we're watching very closely is New Orleans, Louisiana. As of yesterday, it was the 6th time of the season you were in the cone, which is a record for you. Today, you're no longer in the cone, but you are under a tropical storm watch, and you will have some significant impacts. And size of a system can really make a difference, especially when we're talking about that push of water and storm surge.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And as we've been saying, it's a smallish system right now, and you can really see this in the wind field. So a couple of things that may occur here in the next day or so. One is that we'll likely see what is called an eye wall replacement cycle, where that smaller core falls apart and is replaced by a larger core. And also because of the interaction with an upper level system that's coming in across Texas, we're going to see an expansion of this area of winds. And this really shows it very well. You can see it's got a sizable area of strong winds right now, but watch what happens over the next, say, 24 to 36 hours. That area of strong winds gets much, much larger. And at the same time, because it's going to be in an area of warm water and it's going to be in an area of light shear, it's going to be getting stronger, most likely, on its way to getting up to about 120 miles per hour. That's the best guess from the Hurricane Center right now. Then we see in this latest run of the American model, you see the winds really starting to increase tomorrow morning along the coast there. And then the worst of the storm, the core of the storm, that eye wall, starting to come onshore tomorrow evening and then really pushing onshore going through the evening. So we're talking about areas from, say, Lake Charles over towards Lafayette and then farther northward as well, because this one is going to be moving right along, and that's going to bring those strong winds right up into the Mississippi River Basin and towards Jackson, Mississippi as well. So, Jackie, this looks like it's going to be a really rough storm, and man, our hearts going out to the people of Southwest Louisiana. It's just awful to think of going through everything they went through with Laura and then having it happen again.
Right. And the models did do a little bit of a shift westward today, which certainly makes them more vulnerable to that. How confident are we in the track forecast today?
Well, I think I think the models have settled in for the most part. We still do have a little bit of discrepancy, but we're seeing a fair amount of agreement amongst the models. And in fact, I want to show you the European ensemble member tracks here, and you see how they've kind of narrowed. I don't know if you were with us yesterday, but if you were, you can see how this area was narrowed. You saw a lot more what you would call splay yesterday, where they were widening out. And so that's basically settling in on this area near southwest Louisiana. Now, some of the other models, some of the other track models are a little farther to the east. And so the Hurricane Center has not moved it as far west as Houston in terms of the center line of that track. There's still some potential for movement, but what we don't believe is going to happen is we don't think that it's going to, say, affect the central or southern Texas coast that much, because you've got this big trough of low pressure that's sitting over Texas, and that is going to direct the system to the north. Rather than allowing it to move to the west, it's going to be directed off to the west-northwest and then eventually towards the north there. The question is just when exactly does it make that turn, and that will have everything to do with who gets the most. But the best guess right now is that somewhere between Lake Charles and Lafayette is where the storm is headed.
And we talk about the size of the storm and how the impacts are felt so far outside of the cone. But the cone and where the center comes ashore really can make a difference. You know, if Lake Charles, southwestern Louisiana, if it goes just off to their right, they're really going to be in better shape.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, that's what you see in this model run. I'm going to show you the American model once again. And so this is what you're seeing in this model run. The most dangerous part of the storm is what we call the right front quadrant of the storm. And so that's the northeast quadrant there. In this case, it's the area of the storm that's in the right front relative to the direction of travel, which is going to be something like this, because that's where you've got the maximum push of onshore flow. That's where you've got the maximum wind as well. Not that there's not wind in the western half, but it's going to be reduced somewhat because of the forward speed of the storm. And right now, it looks like that core could be between Lake Charles and Lafayette, but a little bit of a deviation is going to make a huge difference.
Certainly best to be prepared either way.
We'll have much
Continuing
more in the
coverage
storm.
right after this.
I called my
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we. Get the information you need to stay safe every day, right here on the Weather Channel.
Welcome back. With Delta on the way, you can see the erosion that Grand Isle, Louisiana has already seen this hurricane season. The battering from Cristobal, Laura, Sally, and Beta has erased beaches and pushed protective dunes closer to failure. Heavy-duty rubber mats are now over the sand in some places to save the natural levee system. And streets are growing empty and more homes getting boarded up thanks to fourth evacuation in this area of the hurricane season. 4 times. Can you imagine packing up all your stuff and your emergency kit and getting the kids in the car and having to go somewhere 4 times? It's been a rough season for sure. Hopefully Delta might be the last one. We go through the end of November is the official end of the hurricane season in the Atlantic. Delta is a Category 2 storm right now. It's got maximum winds of 105 miles per hour. It made landfall earlier near Cancun, and notice the center here is emerging back over the open waters of the Gulf. So that means it's going to have the chance now to intensify once again as it moves over the open and very warm waters into the Gulf of Mexico. This will be spending all day tomorrow over the water and then working its way towards the Louisiana coastline, most likely on Friday, perhaps in the late afternoon hours. This is going to continue to accelerate in forward speed after landfall. And unlike some of our other storms this season, we don't expect it to sit here and linger, but we still have a number of concerns, and it does include inland flooding. We're going to have more on that coming up in just a little bit. Well, as Delta hits the Gulf and buzzsaws towards our coast, this is one of the big concerns. The huge waves that Delta produced along the Cayman Islands and the surge that we could see as a result as well. We want to bring back in our storm specialist, Carl Parker, to discuss what we can expect from Delta. And I know when people hear the messaging that it will likely weaken due to wind shear and cooler water temperatures towards the Gulf Coast, that might not help us out all that much, actually.
Yeah, that's right, because there is a memory here, and that has everything to do with the wave action that is generated by the storm. It's going to be a very large circulation. It is going to generate a huge area of large waves, a wave field, as we call it, and that doesn't go down quickly. Even if the intensity of the storm comes down some, we don't expect that that's going to change that storm surge threat that much as the storm is pushing in. So there you see the storm surge watches in effect, and here's the storm surge potential. It doesn't mean that every section of the coastline are going to see water level rises on this order. What it does mean is that there is this potential depending on exactly where the core of the storm comes in. So you see there, and this is based on the latest track and intensity guidance. And so you see that area there from Vermilion Bay and on westward and farther eastward as well. 7 to 11 feet of storm surge is what is expected. And, you know, as we saw with Laura, this is a very surge vulnerable area of coastline, a lot of low-lying terrain there, and that surge could penetrate well inland. But larger storms are pushing on the ocean over a much larger area and affecting that area for a longer period of time. And so you've got this, you know, enormous area of huge waves that is going to set up across the northwestern Gulf. So even if the storm does manage to drop a little bit in intensity at the last minute, that area of waves is going to be pushing towards the coast. And a big component of surge is what we call wave run-up and wave setup. And we've all experienced this when we've been at the beach. When you're right in the surf zone there and a wave comes up and you see all of that water coming towards you, and then another wave comes in on top of that, well, it raises the water level. And that's exactly what is going to happen in this case, we think.
Right. We used to have storm surge as part of the Saffir-Simpson scale, and we actually took that out because large storms can have greater surge than what you might normally expect.
Yeah, no question about that. And, you know, the Saffir-Simpson scale is really limited in a lot of respects. It tells you about the wind threat. And that's really all that it tells you about. There's so many other aspects of storms. The size of the storm has so much to do with the threat that it poses. The nature of the coastline has so much to do with it. The bathymetry, what's the nature of the sea floor. So, you know, there are a lot of different things. And as we've said many, many times, every single storm is different. So, you know, when you look at the Saffir-Simpson scale, that's really a snapshot. And that can raise a lot of the threats, but not always. And case in point would be Hurricane Charlie back in 2004. That was an incredibly strong storm. It was a Category 4 storm. So you'd be thinking, well, does that mean there'd be a huge surge with that? Well, no, because the radius of maximum wind with Charlie was 7 to 8 miles wide, and the average is closer to 25 to 30 miles. So with a very small core like that, you don't have that surge threat. This is going to turn into a larger system, and that's why that threat is going to increase.
All right, Carl, thanks so much. Great conversation. Real quick before we get to break, I want to hit the Northeast because we do have a big weather story going on here today. Very gusty winds. We've got high wind warnings and wind advisories in effect. On top of that, though, we also have the risk of some strong to severe thunderstorms. Storms have already been kicking, especially in upstate New York. There are no watches in effect, but a few storms could produce some damaging winds. The risk area today stretches from Lake Ontario all the way over towards the coast throughout parts of New England, Boston, Hartford. We're really looking at the window of the strongest of winds to probably be between about 4 and 10 o'clock tonight. But notice some of the stronger storms already ripping through. So be prepared and stay alert this afternoon. More on Delta right after this.
Much better.
My psoriasis.
Get your daily dose of everything weather on Quibi. From the viral
Now to the weather video that we cannot stop watching.
to the vital
Get ready because we are in for another wet week.
and all the wonderful weather in between.
Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
New video into the Weather Channel of Delta whipping up some very strong winds in Cancun, Mexico. Wind gusts of 106 miles per hour was recorded here. There you can see some of the storm surge as well and damage as a result of some of those battering waves. Heavy rainfall and flash flooding continues to be a concern. They got the 1-2 punch there across parts of the Yucatan with heavy rain from Gamma and then Delta that made landfall last night early this morning. I want to give you the latest on our hurricane right now, which is back over the open waters here into the Gulf of Mexico. It spent all morning long working its way across the Yucatan, and now it's getting over the open waters. So its structure has been interrupted just a little bit, but we have confidence that this will get its act back together and intensify and will likely become a major hurricane once again. That could happen even later on today, but more likely to happen sometime tomorrow as it spends all day long over these warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. This will approach the U.S. coastline as we head into the afternoon hours on your Friday into Friday evening. Notice the big change in intensity as we do that. So some weakening will take place, but we think storm surge is going to be one of the big threats with this that could be larger and higher than what you might normally expect for a storm like this as it grows in size. When to be ready time. Here you can see that those tropical storm force winds could arrive as early as Thursday at 8 p.m. So I would say by the time you go to bed on Thursday night, that is the time to be in place where you're going to ride out the storm. Now, our Mike Seidel is in Morgan City, Louisiana. Mike, that's one of the places certainly in the cone, and I'm sure that the mood there, people have got to be very storm weary at this time.
They are. They had a close call with Laura. They had a 3-foot surge here, but they had very little significant impact because they were far enough east, much like New Orleans. But now the track is farther east, and although the track's not etched in stone, we're definitely going to get impacts here. The question right now, 2 days or maybe more than 2 days from landfall, is how serious as far as the wind goes, because they're going to deal with the surge. You can see where I'm standing. This is the seawall that they increased by about a factor of 2 after the flooding in 1973. So this is 22 feet above the water level. This is the Atchafalaya River. They're doing some dredging out here. They always have problems with all the sand and sediment coming upriver in the Atchafalaya Basin. So this is a constant process to keep this channel open. And there's the bridge over the river. So the river's expected to come up. And again, the peak storm surge value, 7 to 11 feet down on the Gulf Coast south of here. We've got that storm surge watch, and I'm sure that'll go up to a warning. Then you see on the other side of me, you can see the town. Now, this is one of the oldest streets in town. This is Front Street, just a quaint street here. It kind of reminds me of the back lot at Universal or Paramount, if you've ever been to those locations in Los Angeles. Meanwhile, we go up high. The drone video gives you an idea of what we're seeing from the ground. You can see the wall, how it snakes up and down the Atchafalaya River. Now, on the other side of town, they've got 2 lakes. So we're also concerned about those 2 lakes as water can back up into those. And then, Carl, we have to worry about the freshwater impacts from the rainfall. But the good thing this time versus Sally, it's not coming in at 2 or 3 miles an hour. It's going to be moving much faster.
Yeah, that's right. Certainly that's going to help out with the rainfall impacts, but that will also bring the wind fairly far inland, and that is going to be among our concerns here. And let's take a look at the forecast up close. You see a major hurricane approaching on Friday morning, and then the storm continues to be a hurricane well inland there as it moves up and along the coast. I want to show you the latest run of the American. This model depiction. It may not be exactly like that, but we've seen a fair amount of consistency on that point. Then it continues to move up and into the Mississippi River Basin there and towards Jackson going into Saturday morning. Could be a lot of strong wind of a very far inland because the thing is going to be accelerating. Delta is going to be picking up speed as it moves inland. So looking at the tropical storm force winds, when to expect them Friday, 8 o'clock in the morning is when we expect we're going to start seeing that strong wind affecting coastal areas of Louisiana. And then by Friday at 8 p.m., that will reach much farther inland across most of the state of Louisiana. And right now, the tropical storm force wind probabilities, and these, by the way, will come up. This is also a function of time. They'll come up as we get closer to the event. But you can see where they're sort of centered between Lake Charles and Lafayette. So that appears to be the zone where we're going to see the strongest wind. We're certainly hoping that this is not going to be a major wind event for Lake Charles after all that you've been through, but it is a possibility. It is a possibility. There's a closer look there, and you see that area of strong winds extending well inland, as mentioned as well. Probability of hurricane force winds. Again, these values are a little bit lower right now, but they'll be increasing as we get closer in time. We'll have much more on this dangerous storm coming up in just a few minutes.
You're watching America's most trusted TV news network,
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
the Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Probably didn't get a lot of sleep early today in Playa del Carmen, Mexico. Certainly not with winds howling like that. Delta charging over the Yucatan Peninsula as a Category 2 hurricane. It was weaker than this time yesterday, and that was the good news, but still hurling wind and rain at the popular tourist destination. So it went to the north of Playa del Carmen and hit very close towards the Cancun area, moved across the peninsula, and look at this, it's back over open water. So still a Category 2 storm, the weekend, but now that it's over its energy source, which is that warm water into the Gulf of Mexico, we expect this thing is going to ramp back up again. The hurricane hunters will go into it this afternoon. We'll get another flight. We'll get another fix on the location, on the intensity, and what the winds are doing. It has all day tomorrow to get stronger before approaching the Gulf Coast here as we head into your Friday afternoon or early evening. We've got hurricane watches and tropical storm watches that have been posted from around the Houston area eastward towards the Florida-Alabama state line. So all these areas are the ones that need to be preparing, and you have until the end of the day on Thursday to do so. Rainfall will also likely be an issue with flooding rains 4 to 8 inches widespread. While the Gulf prepares for Delta, the West is still battling flames. Wildfires raging in California and other parts of the West. The Bobcat fire started a month ago near Los Angeles, threatening the Mount Wilson Observatory for a time. It has burned more than 115,000 acres. California now has its first gigafire. The August Complex fire, a series of separate wildfires, has now consumed more than 1 million acres since it sparked in August. It's the largest fire in California history. As huge wildfires sweep across the western United States, it's a sober realization that this could become a new and scary normal. Dave Malkoff is in Santa Rosa, California, examining how the changing climate is helping to spark new dangers.
This is an unprecedented fire season here in California. More than 4 million acres burned already, not to mention the homes and the businesses and the lives lost all throughout the West. So what is driving all of this?
It's really nasty, Brent.
They're called Very Large Air Tankers. These flights over flaming hillsides are now a common sight.
And you're cleared to drop.
Because there's no denying it, these fires are becoming larger, more destructive, and more frequent than ever before.
Things will burn hotter. The fires will be more aggressive.
The Glass Fire in Napa Valley is now nearly 70,000 acres. In the past, a fire a third that size may have happened once a year.
This year, we're looking at multiple 300,000, 800,000, 200,000 acre fires. These are huge swaths of California that have burned this year.
But this is one of those recurring nightmares. For example, 56 years ago, the Hanley Fire burned through wine country. Then in 2017, a repeat from the Tubbs Fire. Same area, different climate.
That fire in 1964 took 3.5 days. What the same fire in 2017 took 3.5 hours. What's going on in California is really the result of all of the factors climatically and as humans coming down to ground zero in a really, really dangerous way.
Fire department! It's dangerous because so many more people are moving into the woods. According to FEMA, there are 41% more homes in the fire zone now than there were in the 90s. Areas that could have naturally burned in the past have to be quickly put out by these firefighters. And right now, California's windy season is just getting started. Diablo and Santa Ana winds could easily fan this destruction right into next year.
It's not just land use planning. It's not just more staffing. It's not just more defensible space and more vegetation management. It's more of all of those things.
Me too.
There's simply more heat available these days. In the last 5 years, there's been an increase in temperature in the overnight hours. That allows the trees and the leaves to get super crispy and ready to burn when the blazing sun comes out in the morning. In Santa Rosa, California, Dave Malkoff, The Weather Channel.
We need real long-term solutions. In the short term, we need rainfall, and some areas are going to end up getting that. Here's a look at the forecast rainfall totals over the next week. And we were very optimistic a few days ago that California was going to get in on some of this rain from the next system. Unfortunately, the latest trending is that it's going to be drier. So maybe some showers into the northern coastal areas and a little bit of rain into the northern Sierra. But the Bay Area, Southern California will not get the break. You're going to get plenty of rain, though, up here, and you need it there as well into parts of Oregon and Washington State. The Intermountain West will get in on this rain, and there you can see the moisture plume coming in with our next cold front and trough of low pressure that's going to be digging into the region. This likely won't be arriving until we get a little bit closer towards the weekend, so notice that energy down here fizzles out. All the rain pretty much stays offshore, but we'll get a good dousing Seattle, Portland, along the I-5 corridor, through the Cascades, working its way through the Intermountain West. Cold air comes in on the back side of this, so at least we'll get a break in the heat in a lot of these areas. And what you see, that's a lot of blue on the map. That's right, we're getting snow into the higher elevations. We'll be right back.
Unbelievable, this is real.
When your cameras roll,
This is something nobody can imagine.
our experts react.
What do you do? Oh my gosh. Jaw-dropping.
Nope, 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 all the way back home.
It doesn't get better than this.
Don't miss all new episodes of Weather Gone Viral, Sunday nights at 9, here on the Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to Morgan City, Louisiana. Once again, another hurricane and a season that just won't stop. Delta expected to make landfall along the Louisiana coast, south of here, maybe a little southwest of here on Friday, probably later Friday after lunchtime. I want to show you some of the preps. We're looking upriver. This is the Atchafalaya River, which is going to come up. They've already closed some of the seawall gates. What you're looking at is a houseboat. They call them camps here, but what they're doing is taking these houseboats from downriver, upriver, to put them in a safer area before Delta gets in here and really starts to hit hard here late tomorrow night and Friday. Another thing we've heard of is some voluntary evacuations for the low-lying areas here in St. Mary Parish, not here in Morgan City, but the low-lying areas. And we talk about evacuations all the time, and it's really important to know what your evacuation zone is. Here's more with Paul Goodlow.
Hurricane evacuation saves countless lives each year. So it's important to know if you live in an evacuation zone and how to escape the area. Evacuations vary by state and locality. Some cities and counties provide maps so residents know their zone, but some areas don't make that determination in advance. Check with your town or Office of Emergency Management if you have any questions, because evacuation zones can change from year to year. Plan your evacuation route in advance. If you're going on a trip, find out about evacuation zones from your hotel. Listen for updates from local officials. And if you live in an evacuation zone, be ready to go immediately if orders come to get out of the area.
And I'm sure we're going to hear more about voluntary and even mandatory evacuations, especially here in Louisiana, throughout today, tonight, and into Thursday. Let's go back to Carl Parker in the studio. Carl, it's all about, well, the track and the intensity, but right now we're wondering exactly where it's going to come in. We can't etch it in stone, but we've got the GFS model in from this morning. The European will be in here very shortly. What say you about the track at this point?
Well, you know, there's been a little bit of this shift to the west. The European model has always been a little farther west, and the GFS model in its most recent run trending more in that direction. You know, in terms of the broad strokes, I think the models really have settled in on the idea of this coming into Louisiana. The question is, of course, where? There you see the operational run of the GFS coming up maybe just east of Cameron, if we were to take that literally. And then here you see the ensemble members where they rerun the model many, many times to account for possible model errors getting into that initial run. And you see there's still a spread there. They are clustered for the most part about Louisiana, but there is still a spread there indicating that it could be a little more west or a little more east relative to that operational run. And then here are some of the other computer models, track models, and then we can also compare that to the European ensemble members. The European model is similarly also rerun many different times, and you see that this is a little more towards the left-hand side of the entire suite of model guidance, and so more towards the western part of Louisiana and then even the upper Texas coast. So, you know, it appears broadly that it is headed for Louisiana, but we can't rule out impacts a little farther west or a little farther to the east as well. It's just one of those things that we'll have to kind of nail down as we get a little bit closer to the time. For the most part, the models are settling in on a region in the northwestern part of the Gulf, but the details have yet to be sorted out. So right now we're looking at a Category 2 storm, 100-mile-per-hour wind, now coming off the northern part of the Yucatan. It made landfall at 5:45 in the morning just south of Cancun. Did mercifully weaken some before it came in. It had been a 145-mile-per-hour storm, and it did drop in intensity overnight. But we do expect that as the storm is going to be out over the open water of the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to have a lot of time with a generally favorable environment and very warm waters. That is going to raise the storm up to 120-mile-per-hour storm. So a major hurricane is going to be approaching the coast. Now, as it gets close to the coast, it is likely going to encounter a little more wind shear and also a decrease in water temperatures. And so that may weaken it some right as it's coming in. We could certainly hope for that, but expect this to be a very powerful and a very dangerous storm. There you see the hurricane watches in effect from the extreme upper Texas coast around Beaumont and then across into Lake Charles, into Lafayette. We hope that you do not get the core of the storm in Lake Charles. We know that you don't want to deal with that after everything that you've been through this year. And then also into Morgan City and south of New Orleans, and then penetrating fairly far inland. This storm is going to be different than some previous storms this season in that it's going to be moving. It's going to be accelerating as it comes on shore, and that will allow the storm to bring those winds fairly far inland. We'll stay with the Weather Channel all day and week as we track Delta. Our team spread out across the Gulf Coast to bring you the latest developments on this powerful storm.
I've pulled your credit and
When your cameras roll, our experts react.
jaw-dropping.
Weather Gone Viral, Sunday nights at 9, here on the Weather Channel.
Know your evacuation zones and make those store runs right now. This is the time to get ready as the clock is ticking for Hurricane Delta to make landfall on the Gulf Coast. Places affected by Laura are among the cities in the cone yet again. Hurricane hunters are currently flying in and out of the storm to help warn you about the dangers of the storm as they collect data. We have live team coverage up and down the Gulf Coast as this Category 2 hurricane gets closer by the hour. Mike?
Hey, Jackie, good afternoon from Morgan City, Louisiana, where they are under a hurricane watch, and we'll show you how they're keeping the city protected. They're already making preps. Things are getting going here ahead of Delta due here sometime on Friday. Jackie?
All right, Mike, thanks so much. We'll check in with you in just a bit. Thanks so much, everybody, for being with us today with our continuing coverage of Hurricane Delta. I'm meteorologist Jackie Jarris. We've got storm specialist Carl Parker, who's going to be joining us in just a minute. Now, Delta is forecast to be the 10th storm to hit the U.S. this year. It's the 25th named storm overall this season. We want to get you caught up on what we know right now. The governors of Louisiana and Alabama have declared a state of emergency. Mandatory evacuations have been ordered of tourists underway along the Alabama coast. There have also been evacuations on 56 platforms and one offshore oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. And in Louisiana, some school districts are closed through Friday. So Delta made landfall overnight, Carl, and it is now Category 2 storm, but it's emerging back over the Gulf of Mexico, and more changes are ahead.
Yeah, it's got time to get more organized, and that is what is expected. It is expected to regain status as a major hurricane. Right now, we got the brand new advisory, by the way, from the Hurricane Center, 100-mile-per-hour storm moving northwest at 17 miles per hour, just coming off the coast of the Yucatan there. And here's the forecast track and intensities from the Hurricane Center, taking the storm up to 120 miles per hour by late tomorrow. And then it's going to be approaching on Friday, most likely as a major hurricane. And then we can hope that there is some weakening right at the very last minute, right as it's coming on shore. You see hurricane watches in effect, the upper Texas coast near Beaumont into Lake Charles, as well as Lafayette over towards Morgan City and fairly far inland. The storm is going to be picking up forward speed as it moves in, so it's going to bring those hurricane force winds well inland, not crawling onshore as so many have so far this season. And then the storm surge watches in effect, a very surge vulnerable area of coastline there in southern Louisiana, potentially looking at as much as 7 to 11 feet of surge near the core of the storm as it comes onshore. There you see the system right now as it's moving off, still a very robust area of thunderstorms near the center of circulation, and it's getting back out over an area where there's a lot of warmth in the water. That is going to fuel this storm. It's going to help power it back up to major hurricane status most likely, and the upper level wind environment is going to be favorable. You've got light winds around the storm, some stronger winds just off to the north, so that is really optimal for strengthening. But what we think is going to happen is that as the storm gets closer to the coast, it's going to begin to run into those stronger winds, and that will most likely serve to help to bring down the intensity somewhat. And also, there is cooler water right along the northern part of the Gulf and along the coast because of recent fronts that have come down. So that too will likely bring down the wind some. So we can hope that that happens pretty rapidly and that reduces the wind threat some. However, it is still entirely possible that we'll be looking at a very powerful storm coming onshore. And there you see that change in intensity from Friday morning, major hurricane, 120 miles per hour, and then Friday evening as it's inland down to 80 miles per hour. So certainly we're going to be looking at a significant threat here for wind and for surge and for heavy rain, Jackie, extending far inland as the storm is picking up speed.
All right, Carl, stand by for just a second because I want to talk to you more about intensity changes. But first, we want to share with you some new video, as this is what it looked and sounded like as Delta made landfall on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. This is Playa del Carmen. Strong winds and rain hit the popular tourist destination. Delta had weakened to a high-end Category 2 hurricane by the time it made landfall in Mexico. Its eye has been very small as well, and you get somewhat of an idea of that from this video from hurricane hunters as they flew through Delta. More missions are set for today. In fact, they're back in the storm as we speak, as it pushes into the Gulf of Mexico. So, Carl, let's go back into this conversation. Hurricane hunters are going to be getting, a better fix to see how this is emerging and just how strong it might be right now. But we've already seen a lot of changes in intensity. We had the rapid intensification that took place yesterday, much faster, I think, than a lot of people anticipated, but it also started to weaken before a landfall more than we anticipated.
Yeah, it had a very small core. It had what we call a pinhole eye that was only 4 miles across. And when you've got a really small core like that, a storm can ramp up really quickly, get a lot stronger in a short period of time, and it can also drop down very quickly when conditions are less than optimal. And that's exactly what happened last night. You look at the satellite loop here as the storm was approaching. We never did see a cleared out eye, even though the storm was at Category 4 intensity earlier in the evening. Now, by late in the evening, they dropped the intensity from 145 to 130. They actually did not find winds stronger than 107 miles per hour as the hurricane hunters were in there just prior to the 11 o'clock advisory. So, you know, they could have actually dropped it to Category 2. But of course, Jackie, that presents a messaging problem, because if you drop it way back based on this plane data, and then it suddenly gets much stronger overnight, and it's coming in as perhaps a 150 mile per hour storm. Well, that's not good either.
Yeah.
So it really does put them in a bit of a position that way. But thankfully, that weakening trend did continue, so it wasn't anywhere near Category 4 intensity as it came in this morning.
Yeah, I always feel like better to prepare for the worst and hope that it comes in a little bit weaker.
Yeah.
So let's talk more about intensity of what we can expect forward, because now we're back over the Gulf of Mexico. We've got all tonight. We've got all day tomorrow to feed off that warm energy and fuel from the Gulf.
Yes, exactly right. There's a lot of warm water out there, so that's a big part of what we look at. The other part is what's going on with the upper level wind environment. So this very small core was bothered by this stronger wind, which you see right in there. That's easterly wind coming in and shearing the system, somewhat restricting the outflow, as we say. As it moves off to the northwest, it's going to get into this bubble. It's going to get into this area where the winds will be lighter aloft. And that is going to last until it gets to the coast there, until it gets to Louisiana. So, Jackie, I do think we're going to be looking at optimal conditions for strengthening over the next day or so as it's approaching, up until the point where it's approaching. So, you know, certainly we could be looking at a much, much stronger storm.
All right. Thanks so much, Carl. We want to talk about where Delta is going next, as this is going to be changing direction a little bit. It's on a northwesterly track right now, but will get picked up by a trough and pull it in a more northerly direction, then eventually off towards the north and east. So we're looking at the potential for landfall sometime on Friday. That will likely happen maybe into the afternoon or into the evening hours, and it will likely weaken as it does so. Carl's going to come back with another conversation with us in a little while to talk about why that weakening might not be that big of a deal in terms of changing any of our impacts. Unfortunately, Southwest Louisiana is back in the cone. Lafayette is back in the cone. New Orleans is not in the cone, but this is going to end up being a stronger, larger storm, and so impacts are going to be felt far outside of that cone in New Orleans, even under that tropical storm watch as we speak. So areas off to the right in particular may still have issues with coastal flooding and storm surge, not to mention heavy rainfall that's going to go all the way up into parts of the Tennessee River Valley and into the Ohio River Valley as well. So those are the things that we have to track down the line. In the meantime, we want to find out how preparations are going right now. Meteorologist Mike Seidel is in Morgan City, Louisiana. And Mike, here we go again for Louisiana. This is not great news, but by now they certainly know the drill, I would think.
They certainly do after Laura. Laura went west of here, so they had minimal impact here. They had a 3-foot surge, not a whole lot of power out. It was all over in the southwest part of the state, the western part of Louisiana, as we know how bad Lake Charles and down towards Cameron and those beaches got hit. We're out here on the Atchafalaya River. We're looking down river towards, well, where it ends up, the Gulf of Mexico. They're doing their dredging. This is very typical to keep the river channel open and deep. A lot of sediment and sand comes upriver through the Atchafalaya Basin over time. So this is not because, particularly just because we have another hurricane coming in. This goes on constantly. Let's spin around here, and we've got this boardwalk here that's kind of a big dock, and this is the Morgan City seawall. Now, they increased it by a factor of 2. Back in 1985, they got it built up to 22 feet. They had some horrible flooding in the early 70s. It was only about 12 feet. So you get a sense as I walk over here how big this wall is. And then down there is one of the seawall gates they closed this morning. Let me show you what it looked like. It's kind of old-fashioned. They got a piece of heavy equipment and a chain, and they just pull on it and pull on it. You can see there how it just closes right up. Now, there are other entrances for us to get out, and they're not going to close those today, but they're just trying to get some of them closed to get a little head start on what's going to come in here, and that's going to start tomorrow night. And certainly Friday is the day here. We're under hurricane watch. That will more than likely, almost guaranteed, that will be changed to hurricane warning, if not late tonight, tomorrow morning from the National Hurricane Center. Nice sunny day today, upper 80s. Now the real threat with the wind and rain again is going to be late tomorrow night, and the timing's not etched in stone on the landfall, and certainly Friday and Friday evening. If you've got weekend plans, no problem Sunday. Saturday morning, there may be a few leftover showers here, depending on how fast it moves through the state of Louisiana. So, Jackie, yes, another tropical system in Louisiana. New Orleans, once again, at this point, is going to miss the worst of this. Remember, we were concerned about Laura. That stayed too far to the west. Houston was more threatened for a couple of days. And then we had Sally, which ended up farther east. So they have really been fortunate. Right now, New Orleans, the city, and the lake is under a tropical storm watch.
All right, so let's talk more about that. New Orleans, by the way, it is one of the places that we have to watch closely. They're not in the cone today. They were yesterday, which was the 6th storm, by the way, that put them in the cone, which was record. Today, no cone, but the tropical storm watch. So you are going to have impacts. Either way, heavy rain will be a concern here in New Orleans. The pumps are working and going, so hopefully they'll be able to keep up with the rainfall rates, but we could get some surge, certainly with Lake Pontchartrain there as well. So something we're going to have to keep an eye on. Let's talk about some of the intensity impacts that we can expect. Carl, we talked about that a little bit, but also the steering. You know, New Orleans, not in the cone, but they'll still have some impacts. This seems to be the hot zone this year.
Yeah, it really does. You know, and it's unfortunate. I know we've heard anecdotally from some people from Lake Charles who just do not want to face another storm here. They've been through so much already. And so we've seen a little bit of a shift in the intensity guidance here. That is the forecast cone as it stands right now. Now here's the latest run of the American model, the operational run of the US GFS model. Little bit of an edging to the west there, taking it in maybe just east of Cameron, then running up between, say, Lafayette and Lake Charles. And then when we look at the ensemble members of the GFS, pretty tightly clustered, but you see a range of possibilities there, anywhere from Lake Charles and then points farther east as well, over towards Baton Rouge and even as far east as New Orleans. So, you know, by no means is it set in stone that the storm is going to be coming into, say, the central or west to central coast of Louisiana. There's still some possibility that we'll see some moving around here. We look at some of the other track models, and you see that they are generally settled on Louisiana, but a wide array of possibilities. And then the European model, and by the way, the new run is just starting to come in, so we'll have new data from the European coming up before the end of this show. And you see that is more on the left side of all of the track guidance, and so implicating parts of the upper Texas coast as well, Jackie. So there's still some unresolved questions here, but generally it looks like Louisiana is going to be the target for this storm.
And let's talk about steering for this overall. We've got a trough that's going to be picking this up, and the good news with that trough, though, is that it should pick it up soon enough that it will move fast enough that we're not talking about a stalling situation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so here you see the trough, that area of brighter pink color across Texas right in there. So, you know, what that does is it precludes a westward motion. We're not going to see direct impacts in the middle or lower Texas coast, say around Brownsville, South Padre Island, because the storm is going to be grabbed up by that strong upper level wind. The question is, when exactly is that going to occur? And before that occurs, there's going to be an area of lighter wind aloft there in the Gulf where the storm is going to be sitting, and that is optimal for strengthening. So that's why the intensity guidance, well, not as high as it was yesterday, and that has something to do with where the storm is starting. It's starting in a different position relative to where it was yesterday, but you see a lot of that intensity guidance topping out maybe just into Category 3 intensity and then dropping off very quickly as it is approaching the coast or moving in. That is the big question. We do know that it's most likely going to weaken as it's nearing the coast because of increased shear and cooler water. At the same time, however, the storm is going to be getting much, much larger, which means wind impact over a larger area, and that means a very significant surge impact as that big area of strong winds is moving in, Jackie. So this is still going to be a very dangerous storm, even if it does begin to weaken as it nears the coast.
Right. So we have to hit a commercial break here in just a couple of seconds. So let's hold that thought, Carl. And I want to talk coming up in just a second about how size can really make a difference. And that weakening coming up towards the Gulf Coast might not matter all that much, especially not when it comes to storm surge. So now is the time to prepare. And when do you need to finish all those preparations? Well, right now, the tropical storm force winds may arrive as early as Thursday at 8 p.m. It's a little bit more likely that they'll arrive by Friday morning, but I would say by the time you go to bed on Thursday night, that's when you need to have everything rushed to completion, everything done, and you need to be in your place where you're going to be riding out the storm. We'll have more on Delta right after this.
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we. Get the information you need to stay safe every day, right here on the Weather Channel.
New video into the Weather Channel. Crews cleaning out ditches, preparing for Delta's arrival. This is in Patterson, Louisiana. It's about 90 miles to the southwest of New Orleans. So preparations are underway in that state, and folks all within that cone and to the right of the cone too need to be prepared for all that Delta is going to be bringing us. Landfall most likely sometime on Friday. So let's give you the basics here of what we know about the storm right now. Made landfall in Mexico in the early morning hours, moved across the Yucatan Peninsula, now back over the open waters, but into the Gulf of Mexico. It's a Category 2 storm, maximum winds of 100 miles per hour. The hurricane hunters are presently flying back into the storm, and we'll get a new update and a new cone and a full package of updates with that data coming in at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, 4 o'clock Central. In the meantime, this is our forecast cone showing you the intensity increasing back to a major hurricane as it spends all day tomorrow over the very open, very warm water temperatures, and then turns north to northeasterly towards Louisiana, towards the Tennessee Valley, and eventually into the Ohio River Valley, bringing some heavy rainfall there. Hurricane watches and tropical storm watches are posted here from eastern Texas all the way over to Bay St. Louis into Mississippi. And the impacts are not just going to be at the coast. And with the storm that's going to be moving at forward speed, keep in mind the wind impacts will stay a little stronger farther inland compared to some of the other storms that we've experienced this year. Rainfall amounts could range to as much as 6 to 12 inches in the path. That's the Euro model, and there you can see the GFS model showing it similar, but just a little bit shifted off towards the east. Well, as Delta hits the Gulf and buzzsaws towards our coast, this is one of the big concerns. Huge waves that Delta produced along the Cayman Islands and the surge that we could see as well. We want to bring back our storm specialist, Carl Parker, and talk about this, Carl. And, I hate to focus at all on what we're calling the weakening of the storm as it gets closer to the coast, because just because the wind speeds may be going down a little bit, that would help us in terms of wind damage, but not necessarily so much with storm surge.
Yeah, and you have to think about Katrina, because Katrina was a Category 3 storm as it came in, but the surge was unbelievable, and that was due in part to the fact that it was so strong. It was a Category 5 as it was farther offshore. So a lot of that wave energy had been built up, and even as the storm was weakening, it still allowed this incredible surge to come in. Now, this is not going to be that, we don't believe. However, something similar may occur here in that the wave action is already going to be built up, and that is going to keep that surge threat very, very high. So you see the storm surge watch there. Another big part of what's going to happen here is the size of the wind field. So I want you to compare these just visually. Look at the area of strongest winds, how far across that is right there. Now compare that to the distance between Brownsville and New Orleans. And you see that's a much wider area between Brownsville and New Orleans. Now, let's take this forward and show you how the area of strong winds is going to expand. And by the time we get into Friday morning, it is going to fill this area from Brownsville to nearly New Orleans. So it's going to be a much larger area of strong winds, which means a much larger area of ocean being affected and for a longer period of time. So size is really huge when you're talking about forecasting storm surge. The very worst of it is going to be right where that core of the storm comes on shore. Wherever that happens to be, that right front quadrant right there is going to be where the very worst of the surge will be. But there will be surge impacts well out to the east as well, Jackie. I mean, it could be, 100, 150, maybe a couple hundred miles away off to the east. We still see some significant water level rises.
Yeah, with that onshore flow stretching all the way through much of the Gulf for sure. That's a really good example, I think, of one of the reasons why storm surge used to be a part of the Saffir-Simpson scale, but no longer is.
Yeah, the Saffir-Simpson scale is useful in some ways, but it's very limited. It's telling you about what the wind speed is, and of course that's important, and that can have an impact on the other facets of the storm. But, for example, size, it doesn't tell you anything about size. And you go back to Charley in 2004, Charley was a Category 4 storm, so you might think, well, that's going to produce quite a surge, but the center of the storm was so small, the radius of maximum winds was 7 to 8 miles wide, and that's about a quarter of what it is typically. So it didn't produce much surge at all. Size has so much to do with
producing quite a bit of hail. The hail is relatively small, about pea size, but we're getting reports that it's starting to collect on the ground. In addition to this whole line within here capable of producing some pretty strong winds. So just a big heads up, you don't want to get caught out in this. You don't want to go out there and travel right now. This whole line is expected to continue to push off towards the east. And in addition to the storms, we also just have strong synoptic winds today. We've got wind advisories from Boston to New York City.
Attention. Watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather on Quibi. From the viral
Now to the weather video that we cannot stop watching.
to the vital
Get ready because we are in for another wet week.
and all the wonderful weather in between.
Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
All right, check out this video. This shows you Delta whipping up some strong winds in Cancun, Mexico. In fact, wind gusts were recorded near Cancun at 106 miles per hour. You can also clearly see some of the storm surge there and some of the damage to the piers as well as into the marina area and those boats. Heavy rain across the region as well. Of course, Gamma came through there first and soaked the area, and then on the heels of that came Delta. Well, Delta is past Mexico now, still bringing some pretty heavy rain, though, across parts of the Yucatan. But now that it's back over open water, it's going to have a chance to get stronger yet again. It's a Category 2 storm, maximum winds 100 miles per hour. It's moving towards the north and west at 17 miles per hour. So that's a pretty good clip. It's going to spend all of tonight, all day tomorrow, and into your Friday morning over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. So it will likely become a Category 3 storm or better yet again. Some weakening expected upon approach, but still widespread, very dangerous threats coming with Delta. This will continue to then track up towards the north and the east, work through the Tennessee River Valley and the Ohio River Valley. So folks downstream here, Memphis, say up towards Paducah, even into the Cincinnati area can expect to get some heavy downpours with this. Notice the big change in the wind speed after making landfall, especially we've got wind shear, we've got cooler water temperatures, but surge may ultimately be one of the biggest concerns, I think, with this. In terms of go time, when you should expect to stay in place to ride out the storm, with whether that's in a shelter if you've been told to evacuate or within your home, Thursday 8 p.m. is the most likely likely time that we would have some of the tropical storm force winds arriving. So our Mike Seidel is in Morgan City, Louisiana, and that is within the cone yet again. And Mike, I imagine, it's difficult for these people, especially in the southwestern parts of Louisiana, that here we go again, because we're seeing some similarities in the track to what we saw with Laura.
We are right now, though. We're pretty confident that it's not going to go right over Lake Charles. Gosh, let's hope so. Those folks have been through hell and back. They have gotten their power back on. They took, for some, about 3 weeks. We're here in Morgan City. The elevation officially 7 feet. This is the Atchafalaya River. They're doing their dredging. They do this normally. They get so much sand and sediment that come upriver from Atchafalaya Bay. They have to keep doing this to keep the channel nice and deep for shipping. But this is the seawall that protects them from the river. Now, this goes up 22 feet. They increased it by about a factor of 2, and they finished it 35 years ago in 1985, and I want to show you one of the seawall doors. I'll call it a door that they closed this morning. It's a huge door. They've got a lot of these to close. They're getting out ahead of Delta, which is going to really impact here on Friday, and you can see how high it goes up. And let me show you what it looked like this morning when they were closing it. It's kind of, old-fashioned. They just get the heavy equipment out here with a big chain, and they just pull it closed. It's as simple as that. They've got a lot of that to do ahead of Delta. Also ahead of Delta, we heard of some voluntary evacuations. We talked to the deputy sheriff this morning.
They're voluntary evacuations from the areas south of the Intercoastal Waterway, which will hit our, further south points like Sycamore Point, Burns Point, and those are the areas that always take on water when we have a storm like this. We're going to be moving in some communications and setting that up tomorrow. It'll be ready to roll. We'll set up incident command there with the sheriff's office. The United States Coast Guard will also be in there, and they work real well with us in times like this.
And those areas are low-lying, so that's why there's a voluntary evacuation there. Meanwhile, Carl Parker just taking a look at the new European is in, and it's tracking the center, again, west of the GFS track, the American model, but still east of Lake Charles. So I guess you got to put the goalpost up somewhere. It's going to be somewhere between the European and GFS, or we'll see which one pulls out the W. But right now, both models have the center east of Lake Charles, which is what we're hoping for.
Yes.
Well, we'd hope it would just fall apart and not get here, but the hoping for the best.
Yeah, it's been just such an awful time there, as you mentioned, in Lake Charles, and we really, really hope that they can avoid the worst of this storm. Interesting, the hurricane hunters have been out in the system, and they've made a pass already. Now, they may have to make several passes to get a really good sense of what's going on. So far, the winds that they've been reporting have not been as high as what is the official reading right now. So we'll see what happens as they make successive passes with the storm. That would be certainly good news. If it's even weaker than anticipated, that could have an effect downstream here in terms of the forecast. But right now, it is expected that because it will have time out over the warm water in the Gulf of Mexico and a very favorable environment aloft, that it's going to reach major hurricane status once again. Exceptionally warm water, in fact, in the central part of the Gulf, and the wind environment is going to be optimal, at least for a period of time, until the storm gets closer to the coast. So we'll talk much more about this powerful and dangerous storm in just a few minutes.
You're watching America's most trusted TV news network,
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
the Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Welcome back. We've got some new video here. As daylight arrived over the Yucatan Peninsula, residents got their first look at the damage that had been done by Delta. In this video, you can see tree limbs littering some streets in Cancun, power poles being bent in places as well. Ooh, just hanging by a thread there. Trees snapped in the force of Delta's winds, and water collecting on some of the roadways. A lot of surge issues there in the region as well. Welcome back to Weather Center Live today. Meteorologist Jackie Jarris, storm specialist Carl Parker is going to be joining us in a little while as well. We want to give you the latest on Delta, which is now a Category 2 storm, packing winds at 100 miles per hour. It worked its way across the Yucatan, and the center is somewhere right within here. So it's back over open waters, which allows the hurricane hunters to go back in it. They're sampling the atmosphere right now. We're going to get a new update. We're going to get a new cone. All of that coming at 4 o'clock Central Time. Now, we are expecting, because it's going to be spending all this time over the warm waters of the Gulf, for it to intensify once again. Wind shear is very light and the waters are very warm, so that should allow it to grow in intensity back to a major hurricane before working its way towards the Gulf Coast and weakening due to cooler waters and some wind shear that will move in from Texas. It's going to take a bit of a right-hand turn, working through the Tennessee Valley and the Ohio River Valley. So just a heads up, in a place like Greenville, into Memphis, Nashville, Louisville, even into Cincinnati, you'll likely be getting some heavy rainfall as a result of all of this. Tropical storm watches and hurricane watches have been posted now, and this stretches from eastern Texas all the way over towards Bay St. Louis into Mississippi. So now is the time to prepare, and the Gulf is doing that right now. But in the meantime, we have other issues across the country too. The West is battling flames, wildfires raging in California and other parts of the West. The Bobcat fire started a month ago near Los Angeles, threatening Mount Wilson Observatory for a time. It's burned more than 115,000 acres, and California now has its first gigafire. The August Complex fire, a series of separate wildfires, has consumed more than 1 million acres since it was sparked in August. It's the largest fire now in California history. As huge wildfires sweep across the western United States, it's a sobering realization that this could become the new and scary normal. Dave Malkoff is in Santa Rosa, California, examining how climate change is helping to spark new dangers.
This is an unprecedented fire season here in California. More than 4 million acres burned already. Not to mention the homes and the businesses and the lives lost all throughout the West. So what is driving all of this?
It's really nasty, Brent.
They're called Very Large Air Tankers. These flights over flaming hillsides are now a common sight.
And you're cleared to drop.
Because there's no denying it, these fires are becoming larger, more destructive, and more frequent than ever before.
Things will burn hotter. The fires will be more aggressive.
The Glass Fire in Napa Valley is now nearly 70,000 acres. In the past, a fire a third that size may have happened once a year.
This year, we're looking at multiple 300,000, 800,000, 200,000 acre fires. These are huge swaths of California that have burned this year.
But this is one of those recurring nightmares. For example, 56 years ago, the Hanley Fire burned through wine country. Then in 2017, a repeat from the Tubbs Fire. Same area, different climate.
That fire in 1964 took 3.5 days. What the same fire in 2017 took 3.5 hours. What's going on in California is really the result of all of the factors climatically and as humans coming down to ground zero in a really, really dangerous way.
Fire department!
It's dangerous because so many more people are moving into the woods. According to FEMA, there are 41% more homes in the fire zone now than there were in the 90s. Areas that could have naturally burned in the past have to be quickly put out by these firefighters. And right now, California's windy season is just getting started. Diablo and Santa Ana winds could easily fan this destruction right into next year.
It's not just land use planning. It's not just more staffing. It's not just more defensible space and more vegetation management. It's more of all of those things.
Me too.
There's simply more heat available these days. In the last 5 years, there's been an increase in temperature in the overnight hours. That allows the trees and the leaves to get super crispy and ready to burn when the blazing sun comes out in the morning. In Santa Rosa, California, Dave Malkoff, The Weather Channel.
Well, in the short term, we could use some rainfall to help things out, and that's going to happen for the Pacific Northwest. Unfortunately, a lot of California is going to miss out on this. We were optimistic a couple of days ago that that moisture could make it into the Bay Area, but it's not going to quite reach there, I don't think. So just northern California into the northern coastal areas, into the northern Sierras may get a little bit of rain, but the bulk of it's going to be up here into Washington and Oregon. The heaviest amounts into the higher elevations across the Olympics, as well as into into the Cascades. Now, the energy from this storm coming in from the Pacific Ocean right now, look at that moisture working its way in already. This was a storm that hopefully was going to bring that Southern California rain, but that kind of fizzles out, unfortunately, before it ever reaches the coast. So all the main energy from the trough is going to stay up there along the I-5 corridor, and cold air is going to come in, or colder air anyway, behind it. So at least temperatures will begin to go down a little bit. Any little bit helps.
Your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Good afternoon once again. Welcome back to Morgan City, Louisiana. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel. We continue our coverage of Hurricane Delta, expected to hit here on Friday. The seawall, 22 feet, protecting the city from the Atchafalaya River. They've started closing some of the gates. This one is still open. They'll get this closed certainly by late tomorrow. And we'll walk out here and show you the Atchafalaya River. Now with Laura, which was, gosh, I don't know, it seems like 2 months ago, not quite 2 months ago, they had a 3-foot surge. That's because Laura came in so far to the west. This one, Delta's expected to landfall farther east. So that puts us in a more precarious situation. Surge forecast values are 7 to 11 feet. That's the extreme south of here on the Gulf of Mexico. And because of this, there are already mandatory evacuations in the low-lying areas in St. Mary Parish. There will be more evacuations, so it's very important to know your evacuation zone. Here's more with Paul Goodlow.
Hurricane evacuation saves countless lives each year. So it's important to know if you live in an evacuation zone and how to escape the area. Evacuations vary by state and locality. Some cities and counties provide maps so residents know their zone, but some areas don't make that determination in advance. Check with your town or Office of Emergency Management if you have any questions, because evacuation zones can change from year to year. Plan your evacuation route in advance. If you're going on a trip, find out about evacuation zones from your hotel. Listen for updates from local officials. And if you live in an evacuation zone, be ready to go immediately if orders come to get out of the area.
We couldn't do it without the National Weather Service, the hurricane hunters. Carl Parker, you've been following their movements out there over the Gulf of Mexico. What's the latest? What are they seeing out there? Because, you know, the forecast says this thing is going to re-intensify, but so far it hasn't. But it's just getting back over the water from the Yucatan.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch over the last 24 hours, Mike, because it does have a very small core, and a small core is a lot more susceptible to external influences. You know, yesterday it was being sheared, and so it dropped down to Category 2 intensity overnight. And now it's been over land, and as the hurricane hunters made their first pass, they have so far seen winds of just at hurricane intensity. Now, that may not have been, you know, an optimal pass, and they're going to make several more passes over the next few